live.
All right, so welcome to our session. We're going to talk about biometric AI in practice. And my name is Yngvar Ugland of DNB Bank of Norway, and I run Newtech Lab, and we are the SWAT team for new technology in the bank. And our mission is to provide a portfolio of options for what the future might become in a world where we have never known as much as we know today about how little we know about tomorrow. And we're going to do that as a conversation about some practical things we've been doing within biometric AI, as a conversation with Kumi and yourselves in the audience. Kumi, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Yngvar. Yeah, good afternoon all. My name is Kumi Thiruchelvam. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at MyVoice AI. We're a tiny ML voice biometrics platform company. I've been in the business in cybersecurity in a variety of different identity, security, privacy businesses for the last 10 years or so, and delighted to be here together with Newtech Lab and Yngvar.
Okay, so we just dive into it. In the world where we live, when we go to work, we want to try to answer the big question: WTF? What's the future? And when we look at technologies, we assume that it will follow an exponential line. And that means if you're going to take full advantage of that potential up there, you need to set some extreme references, some potential extreme scenarios for what the future might bring, because that's the only way you can take big enough steps to take advantage of exponentiality. With that in mind, and with the current time as reference, like in DNB, for example, the flagship project that we're doing against customers, both in the consumer market and B2B, is building the ultimate mobile experience. So with relative to that, like an extreme reference in exponentiality might be, what if there are no phones in the future? This might seem a little bit far-fetched. I mean, we use our phones all the time. Then again, if we look at kind of how we ended up, our generation and our biggest fears, it's not that unlikely, it's not that unreasonable to think that we could get a little bit less dependent on our phone. And then Kumi reminded me the other day that actually there's a new fear, and that is, am I muted? But that's something that occurred the last 19 or 20 months or so. So what if there are no phones? What can we do today to start that? And what we did is that we went to a coffee shop in Oslo, and we built something called Pay with Your Face. So here you can come without any cash, without any plastic cards, without smartwatches, without smartphones. You can come in your swimsuit if you want to and pay. And it's ridiculously simple. It works like this. I want to show you. You walk up to the cashier and you say, I want an espresso and a croissant. That's 69 kroners and 50 øre. Norway is ridiculously expensive. So, and as the customer, there's a screen there, you tap it. This was pre-COVID, so okay to tap it. And then you just smile, and you smile and pay. You don't have to smile, but it's as simple as that. And just make sure that it was some technology bravado we tested with some proper users. Here's a random guy.
Hvordan var kjøpsopplevelsen? Den var veldig enkel. Absolutt, og det jo fascinerende å se hvordan ny teknologi kan gjøre det mulig å betale på helt andre måter enn det vi gjør I dag.
So the random guy turns out to be the Minister of Digitalization in Norway at the time. He joined us for the launch. So did national news on Friday night at 9 o'clock in the evening, because this is the world's first receipt where it says ansiktsbetaling, which means face payment. And then you basically come into a shop and things just get paid without any other things. So it seems like you're interacting with like magical surroundings. And it's tempting, brings to mind this: is it really possible that any sufficiently advanced technology, in fact, could be indistinguishable from magic, where we as carbon-based beings are interacting with the surroundings without using the proxy, the silicon-based proxy, namely the phone. So bringing biometric AI from face to voice, and we thought, what can we do that is not just about convenience, but also about customer experience and security? And we took a visit to our customer call center in DNB Bank, they receive something like between 10 and 50 million incoming calls every day. Sorry, every year, which is a lot for a national bank of Norway with a population of 5 million people. And for all of these calls, you need to ask some questions to make sure that is it likely that the person in the other end of the conversation is the person he or she claims to be. Let's try to solve that with voice biometrics. And this is the demo that shows some of the challenges that we had to face for computers for that, and we'll talk through that as well. So this is what it sounds like when you call DNB. You talk to a voice robot.
Press 9 for at vi skal kunne gi deg den beste hjelpen. Si meg noen få ord om hva du lurer på.
Jeg trenger hjelp til boliglån.
Takk. Du vil bli satt over
Then you
til
get
første
directed to the right customer representative. And at this point, we only know the phone number, nothing else.
Ja, hei, dette er Laila. Jeg lurer på hva jeg kan få I boliglån.
Det kan vi hjelpe deg med, vet du. Men først må jeg stille deg noen kontrollspørsmål, så jeg vet at
Here we go with the control
Jeg
questions.
ser at du har et visakort. Husker du hvor du brukte det sist?
Det brukte jeg I matbutikken Kiwi.
Husker du cirka hva beløpet var på?
Cirka 500 kroner.
Ok, vi har fått en sånn ny ting på kundesenteret.
Here's the
Vi har
new
fått
service.
muligheten til å kunne kjenne deg igjen basert på stemmen din.
We're going to take
Som en slags
the part of the
fingeravtrykk,
conversation that is Laila's
Så hvis du har lyst
voice,
til å bruke
record
det,
as
så
a
slipper
voice
du
print.
disse kontrollspørsmålene neste gang. Og alt jeg trenger fra deg da, er at du egentlig bare sier ja til at du samtykker til at jeg kan bruke
and
denne
record
samtalen
that
til å
as
registrere
part with
deg i
her
systemet.
name and her phone number, so we can
Så
do a
er det
lookup
noe du
next time.
samtykker til?
Ja.
Compliance is
Det er
important in
flott.
banking,
Neste
so we
gang
have
du ringer
that.
da, så vil systemet kjenne deg igjen. Da kommer det her til å gå mye enklere. Ha en fin dag!
And unfortunately, she never got any help with what she actually called for. But she's pretty persistent, so she's calling him back and listen.
Jeg
Look
lurer
at
på
this.
noe rundt pensjon.
Something about pension plans,
Du vil
and
bli satt
voila,
over til første ledige
totally
kunder og
different
dyder.
types of words, but we can recognize her on her
DNB,
voice.
du snakker med Espen. God dag, Laila.
Hei, Espen.
So a better, more secure, more personalized experience. And
Si
now
meg noen
the
få
daughter is
ord om hva
calling
du
from her
lurer
father's
på.
phone.
Jeg vil ha ukeslønn, og for grunn av det er urettferdig.
And this is
Takk.
really
Du
interesting.
vil bli satt
The
over til
AI
første
is
ledige
not
kunder
sure.
og dyder.
DNB, du snakker med Espen. Hva kan jeg hjelpe deg med?
Betaler pengene til mammaen min.
Det går nok ikke, skjønner du. Da tror jeg heller jeg må prate med mammaen din. Du får ha det bra.
And now you'll see that this is a very dysfunctional family because now the
Si meg
son
noen
calls
få
from his
ord om
mother's
hva du
phone.
lurer på.
Jeg skal ta ut alle pengene til moren min.
Takk. Du vil bli satt
Um,
over til første ledige kunder og dyder.
There we go.
DNB, du snakker med Espen. Og hvilken luring snakker jeg med nå, da?
Kan jeg bestille en pizza?
So he was trying to charm himself out of that. And what we saw was that this didn't work well for the daughter. So that was a challenge we had to deal with. And basically, in short, we had to train the model on a broader data set. And we managed to solve that. But the reason why it behaved like it did, Kumi, can you take us through that and explain that?
Sure. Thank you very much, Yngvar. So I'll try and make sense for some of that demo that you've all just seen. Obviously the notion of know your customer and compliance is hugely important in regulated industries and call centers in banks and financial institutions. So what we've done together with DNB over the last year or so is leverage the unique capabilities of the human voice, so our speech scientists at My Voice will tell all of you that our voice generation is based on a source filter approach. So our vocal folds in our vocal tract, individual to each and every one of us, including the daughter and the son that Yngvar just showed there in that demo, and I'll come back to that, are unique. And then the filter is really the nasal cavity and the oral cavity that we have in our heads, which is different from, let's say, a recording of your voice. And that's why we essentially create from the spectrogram of your voice, we recognize the pattern of compressed air and therefore generate essentially the waveform to try and identify you. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see how we're leveraging AI in order to manage both the enrollment and the verification process. So the first step, as you saw in the demo, is the identification. Who is the speaker? We take the original voice sample. We'll put that through our deep neural network as part of our technology, and it creates a voice print, which is not really a full representation of you like a fingerprint would be, but it's a numerical array of yourself. And that's why training is really important. So we take a data set, we train our algorithms, our inference engine, and we create a similarity score, which can vary, which can vary depending on the security needs of the application. In the banking world, as Yngvar just showed, we retrained the model with a higher data set, and therefore we were able to distinguish between members of a family, and we can vary even in the case of twins, for example. So that's how the technology works and how we've deployed it together with DNB. Over to you, Yngvar.
Thank you. So in the first example I showed you, which was about pay with your face, that was mostly about convenience. And what we saw back in 2019 when we did this was that it was on this adoption curve, it was basically what was called the innovators that was doing this. And we did it as a technology experiment and also to test some of the regulatory parts of it. But we were definitely not sure that this is going to take off anytime soon. And this somehow changed with Corona, because the laggards, for some reason that I'm going to come back to, which is basically because all of a sudden it wasn't about convenience anymore, because these people that tend to be laggards in adopting technology, it wasn't about the key driver that drove the innovators earlier was not what was simplicity, but this time around it was anxiety of your own health. And we could see some really interesting changes in who were driving the adoption. And if we look back at like 2019, when I was asked about this on national television, I basically say that we're trying this out and we're going to be ready if the market ever asks for it. Optionality, a portfolio of options. So this is 2019, June 2019, August 2020, after Corona has happened. And this happens, all of a sudden it becomes a thing because of some unexpected changes. Pop ID in California, Pasadena, deploys pay with your face in grocery stores. And our first proof of concept or experiment with My Voice AI was back in 2018, where we tried out pay with your voice. And that was definitely only for innovators. And then again, something unexpected happens. We don't know very much about tomorrow. So that was 2018, September 2020. Pay with your voice comes with Alexa, pay for my gas with Amazon. And this, again, the importance of optionality in a world where we don't know too much about the future. What we do know is that it changes user behavior. And here's the branch office of DNB Bank. We don't have drop-in anymore. People don't want to drop in and meet a lot of other people because of anxiety of getting infected these days in particular. But people would still want to meet people, especially about the more important choices in life, such as your financial situation, your mortgage, and that some kind of things. So you still want to meet people in the bank, your advisor, but what we've done now is that it's by appointment only, and you can access the bank yourself. So the low-tech version of that would be a QR code and potentially a PIN. But in our portfolio of options for the future, we have some other technologies that we showed you. So we also have voice and face. And we tested out how all of a sudden it might become relevant that you can actually access the bank by just talking to the door. So we applied those technologies to a bank, and I'm going to show you a video from a retail event. We brought the bank to the showroom, not the whole bank, but we built it in Lego, so this is what it looks like. And it's the same technology that is actually on the physical banks. So what she explains here in Norwegian is that you're going to enroll, like we saw in the customer call center. Now she speaks, records the voice print that Kumi told you about. Great. So we store it, and then you can come and access the bank. Open to the door, and voila, the door opens. And there's another guy really persistent on saying something completely different than what he did when he was recording the voice print, and voila, green light, it works as well. So basically this is just showing the importance of optionality, having a portfolio of options, and how user behavior changes and how you can apply different things. And then here's an example of when I come to the office at DNB, trying to get in the door. I have my hands full with the motorcycle. I can't pull up a mobile phone for a QR code or type some PIN. I really need to talk to the door. And we talked earlier about science fiction and indistinguishable from magic, and that Arthur C. Clarke, that's sci-fi. So it's like we've been talking about taking science fiction to reality, but this time around it's actually taking fairy tales to reality because the first person who ever talked to the door and opened was called Alibaba, and he had 40 thieves. So now when you can say open sesame and the door opens, we basically take in fairy tales to reality. But this also means that the engine that runs the voice recognition is actually on the door or close to the door. And that means that you can't have a huge computer there. So the chip size needs to be really small. And that's something I would like you to expand about, Kumi.
Sure, happy to do that. So when I first saw that picture, Yngvar, I thought you were actually talking about a low-tech approach of entering your office, which is drive through the glass door.
Brute force.
Brute force. No, I mean, what we've done on that contact center demo earlier that Yngvar was talking about, and I explained through our voice biometric engine, is integrating with CRM systems, IVR systems, usually on premises, although there's an opportunity to deploy on cloud as well. With getting into the smart door lock example that Yngvar just addressed there, it's intriguing you talk about Open Sesame. I was involved in one of my companies with Alibaba, actually in China, with massive warehouse entry and bringing biometrics in the way of fingerprint. Now, what's happening is that obviously in that world, you're getting a lot of constrained resources. You can be battery or mains connected on the door lock, smart door locks. But of course, you're getting into the world of very, very constrained semiconductor resources on such a device, on whether it's a remote control or whether it's a mobile device. And mobiles are becoming really important in the fintech world, as we've probably learned during the course of the 2 days and during this session as well. And so edge AI is becoming really, really prevalent. What we're seeing is compute resources moving from the cloud to the edge. And we are very, very focused on creating and using a machine learning language, TinyML, to try and drive the inference engine and the similarity detection, which means that the technology has to be robust enough, safe enough, accurate enough to be able to infer and retrain on the fly with deep learning to be able to take advantage of the plethora of edge AI chips that are coming out at the moment. And as a company, we're very focused on that. We think that's the future as well. And that's going to move from fairy tales to reality. We're seeing it for computer vision right now. So a lot of edge AI is focused around vision and machine learning vision. We think voice is the natural next medium to take advantage of that. And biometrics and identity is a key part of that growing trend of edge AI.
Great. There's some really good questions coming in the chat. I think we'll try to talk about. I can go ahead with the first one, and then you can read through the rest. Yep. And see if there's one you want to elaborate on. So, what about those consumers who are resistant to biometric technology? Yes, very good point. And that's a more general question. What about consumers that are resistant to technology? And you probably wouldn't believe this, but we a couple of years ago we actually relaunched offline banking, like non-internet banking. So DNB we like to say that we're a bank from A to Z, and that means we need to cater to all. We're the biggest retail bank in Norway. We have about 2.2 million consumer customers out of 5 million, which is pretty good, which means we represent the whole demographic. So yes, it needs to be optional. We just want to make sure that it becomes more convenient, more secure, and more personalized. So that's something you can opt into, but you don't have to.
I'll just add to that as well, Yngvar. I mean, informed consent is super important in whatever way, whether it's a script that a contact center agent is using to safeguard your knowledge, which is why the re-verification of consumers in the banking world is really important. We think that biometrics and voice in particular is super, super easy, and it leads on to the second question about the simplicity of biometrics in the fintech industry. Of course, that example Yngvar showed earlier of the contact center agent talking to a consumer simplifies the customer experience of getting customer service, and actually we're seeing this in the customer service world in general around the world, the use of chatbots. We're quite active in working with voice bots at the moment and bringing speaker verified voice bots into the equation. So we're going to see more and more of the self-help to be able to answer some of these questions, and that's covered, and that's probably covered also in the trend with retail branches, you know, moving, you know, fewer and fewer retail branches as more and more people move to online around the world. And as we see the increase, particularly over COVID, the increased prevalence of e and m-commerce. And that's becoming really, really important. Yeah.
And there's another question there about how do you assure that consumers' data is safe. Why would a bank experiment with face payments? Well, there's making sure that the data is safe is kind of in the post-cash world. Making sure that data is safe is actually what you need to do in order to make sure that money is safe. So banks make a living out of trust. That hasn't always been the case. Well, look back at 2009 and the banking crisis there, and other geographies of the world. It's not as good as it is here where I am in Scandinavia, but that is what banks make a living of. So the thinking is, let's make sure that we are as particular about safety of consumer data on this as we are about their money. There's a question about data bias. It's what I showed you with the daughter calling from her mother's phone is kind of a bias, because when we trained the model better on a broader data set, it worked better. So there was kind of a bias in the first data set, I would say. It worked much better on men speaking English than on young girls speaking Norwegian. And when I speak Norwegian, I have a very different dialect than most Norwegians coming from the Oslo area where I actually live, which means I speak slower and have a much lower pitch, and that affects the model. So that is a practical example of bias that we had to deal with. But bias in data is something that is of really big importance, and that goes for all AI. AI is never more smart, not more intelligent than the data you feed it.
Yep, and that's 100% true. And of course, what we did with DNB is try and focus on free speech. So we try to be phrase and dialect independent, and in fact, what we try and do is to create this numerical array, this voice print, which can't be reverse engineered back to the identity of yourself. So that's how we try and convey the safeguarding of one's biometric identity to the consumer. At least talk a little bit about how we use the technology. It does certainly go into the realms of GDPR and privacy. And that's why I mentioned earlier on about informed consent being really important. It's really, really important. And so we try and take a voice print, which is free speech based. So I see there's another interesting question here about another biometric authentication method, which is face. And I guess it was brought onto the world 4 or 5 years ago by Apple in terms of Face ID. And we see a lot of biometric devices now using Face ID, including the ones that companies like IDEMIA provide at passport control when you go through border control at many cities now. So Face ID is becoming more and more secure by the way that algorithms, again, AI is used. We unlock our phones and use Face ID to unlock our phones, and then we transact. We leverage the stored credit card credentials that we have on the phone to transact. And so it's becoming more and more prevalent, I would say, particularly in South Asia. It's very prevalent, actually, and including China, Eastern China. So there are always, another question was asking about security issues. So this is the same, I think, in terms of a sort of a cultural innovation and mindset and digital transformation, moving to business transformation. I think banks in particular have to go through fundamental business process changes, because the way they then deploy compliance and GDPR compliance is different when you start using different security protocols for KYC. But it's a juggernaut, I think, that we can't avoid, and it's happening, and it's gathering momentum at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And there's when it comes to what pay with your face actually is, it's basically identifying you and connecting that to a credit card that we have on file. So basically the same thing as we did in the customer call center, where you connect the voice print to a phone number and a name. It's basically matching with the phone number, because that's the identifier you have. So, but pay with your face, the way we did it was mainly to test how is the face recognition working as technology, what is the user experience, or rather the perception of doing this, as well as the regulatory things. And of course, if your face, the hash of your face is being lost, it's not that easy. You can always change your password if it leaks, but changing your face is something. Well, in Southern California, I've heard that it's pretty popular, but it's not for everyone, and you should make that decision yourself, not because of some security breach. But also regulatory-wise, what you mentioned, Kumi, Face ID, it happens on the device. So for the pilot, in order to make sure that we didn't make any regulatory breaches, we did the pilot on one location, which means you had to roll in on one location and get recognized on one location to avoid a central storage of biometric data, which might be a regulatory issue.
Yeah, I can see we've got a few minutes left, Yngvar, 2 or 3 minutes. I'm wondering whether the audience have any further questions. I'll touch on anti-spoofing briefly, if the audience give the audience some time to think about any additional questions. There was an interesting article just a few weeks ago on Forbes, actually, that some of you might care to Google, relating to a Dubai-based bank that was hacked by AI being used to mimic one of the directors or one of the account signatories' voice. And it's a good example of what I was talking about earlier, where we're using the source filter approach and using machine learning, particularly tiny machine learning, to continually learn about the data sets, the different speeches out there, in order to have a very high similarity detection of Yngvar's voice or my voice. And so, although it may not seem so, in our world, biometric AI is huge, and we really need to delve into the detail in terms of both the technology and the manner in which it is deployed, i.e. the end use case, whether in a bank or in another customer service world. So we try and focus on what we call anti-spoofing inherent within our technology, in order to avoid those nightmare scenarios where AI is used for non-legitimate purposes.
Yep. All right. So thank you for a great conversation to the audience, and to you, Kumi.
Thank you very much, Yngvar. Enjoyed it very much, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.